digital pioneer who will likely talk about how to help everyone through this digital transformation process that has an $80 million price tag on top of it, right? But in fact, what I'm going to talk about today is how I think you guys, with this $80 million, should be transforming the digital industry. So we're in a kind of this different spot, I think, in our, well, certainly from my personal journey's perspective, you're catching me at a sort of pivot point. And I think there's something really exciting happening right now where the digital industry and the technology industry that we've all been so hopeful and optimistic about is coming through some kind of crisis point where they're trying to sort out exactly whether the unfettered, unbridled, sort of fast-paced gallop towards an innovation economy was really going to set up our society to be more hopeful, more inclusive, more diverse, more just, more equitable, more prosperous, etc. And I think what we've found, if you guys read the papers, is that that's not really what's happening, right? And so what are we going to do about this? And how do we, as an arts and culture sector, inform the work that we're doing and also ensure that any kind of digital transformation we engage in results in the transformation of the digital industry itself. So that's really what I'd like to talk a little bit about and offer you some of my thoughts on how we got here, perhaps, but also what are the key kind of steps we might want to take if that particular project is of interest to you. So raise your hand if you're interested in what I have to say regarding that. Okay, I'm in the right crowd then. I've been in the wrong crowd for a while giving the same talk, so it's kind of nice to be with my peeps. So first and foremost, we have to talk about the context first. So how did we get here, right? So here's a picture of the EDSA revolution. I'm Filipino. CSC Media Lab was founded in 1997. In 2001, texting actually ushered in that EDSA revolution in the Philippines, which overthrew the government, right? And so for the first time, that was the first time social media said, wow, social media has this capacity to fully arm populations with the types of technologies needed to actually transform democracy. Fast forward to 2008, we have the first major digital campaign being used in a political campaign, and Obama rose, like this wonderful phoenix out of the fires of God knows what was happening in electoral politics, and we got this whole new amazing thing around how digital campaigning and the digital, I don't know if you guys remember, oh crap, I've forgotten the website that kind of, does anyone know what that big website was that, sorry? Meetup? No, it wasn't Meetup, it was it's like a change.org or something like that, that really ushered in a lot of these micro donations, etc., right? And then fast forward yet again, we've got the Arab Spring. So it's absolutely clear, and I chose those particular moments because I think the extremity that social media, or the extremes that social media journey has gone through are so stark, right? So in the beginning, when Twitter and Facebook and all those things came out, we really did believe that they were going to be this incredible tools that would help us understand how to create more participatory democracies. But fast forward to today, and we know exactly where those tools ended up leaving us, right? And so now, what we have is really if we were to step back and think about, exactly where we're heading and what other externalities was affecting the technological sort of evolution. These three things, I would say, these three major books, I would say, are some of the kind of important context for us to understand in terms of the external movements that enveloped the technological evolution, right? First and foremost, obviously, is the very specific and seminal work that Piketty did outlining how unequal our societies have become due to the financialization of many things and the fact that capital actually grows beyond just in terms of your salary, but also in terms of the assets that you have, and that exacerbate people's the condition of inequality between those with lots of capital and those without. We have obviously on the other side Georges Monbiot kind of beating the drum in terms of climate change, and then we've got the initial start of research around what these technologies are actually doing for us. And one of the core researchers doing that work is Sherry Turkle, who's done incredible evidence-based research around how screens affect people, and in particular how screens affect behaviors between families, behaviors across children, etc. So all of these three other externalities in terms of thinking and movements and research is also part and parcel of this technology conversation, right? And despite all of this, what's happening is we've had the continuous growth of wealth and power of major monopolies, right? So you've got, I don't even know which one that is. Is that Sergey or Larry? So, the Google folk, Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos. And it's absolutely clear that even though we have examples of Cambridge Analytica, we have examples around all the other externalities that I spoke about, the growth of inequality, etc., that innovation is going to continue to gallop, right? And the innovation that we're moving towards, that perhaps everyone here in the arts sector is being forced to kind of jump into, include the following innovations, right? One is obviously the cybersecurity innovation space, so AKA blockchain. Another one would be the immersive media space, the smartening of everything. And that's also included in terms of the voice interfaces that we now have with Alexa and Siri, etc., right? And all of these things are converging into what is going to be the next computing platform. And they are converging at a pace where we might not be looking at what the unintended consequences of these current infrastructures that are being converged might be. And so when I say that it's critical that the arts sector play a role in the transformation of the digital industry, I'm talking about this in particular, that we are actually moving into this next computing platform, and someone, or a group of people, or some sector, needs to be informed enough about this evolution on the one hand, but also really bullish about the fact that we are caring about what the potential unintended consequences of such convergence might mean for us, okay? The good news is that we also have these people. It's actually, I did this specifically, that the people who are destroying our world are those, and the people who are saving our world are these. And it's true, I mean, I didn't even make this up, okay? So you've got Rain Fisher-Kwan, who's the high school activist, who actually galvanized a whole group of high school students in Ontario to march against the sex ed curriculum. You've got Emma Gonzalez from Florida, who galvanized her students against the Parkland shooting. And you've got Greta Thunberg from Sweden, who everyone knows galvanized millions of students from around the world to fight against climate change. So these are actually our clients. This is who, as the art sector, we are serving. And they're already telling us what they want. So we need to listen to them to see how we can actually transform our sector so that we can serve their needs. So how are we going to do that? Well, I think we need to do that by understanding that technologies can be rechanneled into more productive modes of singular and productive becoming. I'm just going to let that sit. And I love this quote. I used this quote at my talk in the Digital Arts Summit in Montreal. I I used this quote in Saskatchewan, I think. Some guy was there. And I love it because it really talks about this collective becoming, that we're always on the verge of emerging into something else collectively, and that we can choose to use technology to help us do that, right? So it's not about individual optimization. It's not about individual efficiency. It's not about individual, what's the word I'm looking for, so that it's easy, you know. It's really about the mode of growing and becoming into the kind of idealized society that we want. And yes, I feel like I'm a bit idealistic, but what else is there to be? So what are we supposed to do? So here are 12 things that I think we can start with in terms of the process of getting there, okay? And these are some of the things that I think could inform the way you guys think about the next 3 days as you start working on those amazing questions that Margaret and Jessa, who so thoughtfully crafted for you, right? So first and foremost, we need to be accountable. So I choose this Omidyar network slide here, or picture, because you know, I'm kind of presenting this vilification of the tech industry as though somehow they're all bad. Well, there's actually quite a few people who have been in the trenches of technology who understand, like many of us do, that there is a problem, right? So, you know, the Omidyar network and even Microsoft and even parts of Google and parts of Facebook, etc., understand they have to do something. So this notion of accountability is starting to take root. And typically when I talk about accountability, and this is certainly what I did about 3 weeks ago in Ottawa when I was part of a Heritage Committee UNESCO meeting, where their whole kind of topic was on discoverability. Because when they think digital and arts, they always immediately think that it's about discoverability, right? And so I actually say, you know what? We gotta stop this talk about discoverability, man. We gotta start talking about accountability. Because everything right now, I know, and I don't mean to be facetious, I know how hard it is to find audiences. It's not that it's super easy, but I think we all know that that fight for clicks and likes and audiences led us to this place we're in, right? Where the technologies were developed so much so that the only kind of principle around engagement infrastructure was to drive likes, to the point where these technologies were no longer accountable to the content they were actually distributing. So you can't talk about discoverability without talking about that particular problem with making discoverability a core feature of technology infrastructure development. So for us, moving forward, as we go through digital transformation, it's really important to think about accountability first and foremost. There. Of course, we need to be vigilant about privacy and security, right? And privacy and security needs to go beyond the whole terms and conditions thing or privacy. This actually gets to, well, what are we going to do with the data that we're actually gathering? Because as we start to create data marts as part of our digital transformation process, one of the questions we're going to be asked is, who owns the data? How do we share that data? With whom? How secure is it? Do we care if it lives in Canada versus the US? All of these questions become important. And certainly, you know, as an arts, need to be at the front, at the leadership end of this stuff. And, you know, even as I said, some of the technology firms are being forced to really figure this stuff out. I mean, I don't really buy that Oculus is going to be that good with my data, but even that Oculus is the headset manufacturers VR headsets, and they're owned by Facebook, but even they are being driven to start thinking about this, right? So for sure, if these technology, hardware, and software providers are starting to move in this direction, it's critical that the arts sector actually leads that direction. We need to fight for data justice. Now, I gave this talk, or a similar talk at AUG, which is the Augmented World Expo, and which is filled with basically AR, VR, MR startups and investors and things like that. And I have this slide, which is, as a VR creator, you need to understand what data justice is. And I said to the room, how many people have heard that term, data justice? And not a single hand went up. Now, this is not to out you people, but I would like to know, has this term been used at all in the arts sector in Toronto or across Canada? How many have heard of the notions of data justice? So it's still fairly small, right? So this is, I think this is a good place, a good sort of area that, again, the arts sector can play a leadership role in. And if you think about what data justice is, it's really all of these things that the Data Justice Lab in that slide sort of talks about. So it's everything like understanding how algorithms work, being transparent about how the algorithms that you build function. So that's what's called as algorithmic governance, right? Understanding how the data that you collect may discriminate. Understanding how, how your particular infrastructure that you're building may be biased based on how you started to think about the problem in the first place. So this isn't just say that there are people who are less biased. Everyone is biased, right? And the point is to acknowledge that and then to understand how to build systems that acknowledge that and or at least make those biases transparent to the users of your system. So this whole area of data justice, design justice, because this doesn't just belong in terms of how algorithms get created, but also how frameworks get created. So part of the new mode of thinking about this stuff is looking at design thinking principles and seeing whether the design thinking principles that you're using actually come from a more corporatized type of framework. And so what does that mean if you're actually co-creating with communities? So how do you ensure that your design frameworks are in fact not just about co-designing, but about co-creating the frameworks themselves that allow you to co-design with the community that you're serving, right? And then in terms of Toronto, we're very lucky now because we actually have a digital justice lab run by Executive Director Nazma Ahmed. So she's been doing a lot of workshops around this stuff, around data justice, around design justice, and how to start thinking about developing technologies that pay attention to some of these issues, okay? We have to signal the right things. I mean, this is what I mean by the leadership of the arts sector. Now, massive points for anyone who can tell me what this is. This is the new vessel in Hudson Yards, okay? I have a particular bee in my bonnet about it. This is a $200 million public art piece that Dan Doctoroff and the mayor, the office of the City of New York commissioned to create that $25 billion private, I think it's $25 billion, privately owned neighborhood in New York City called Hudson Yards, right? It's the first sort of like super uber luxury city for billionaires that's smart. Like all doors have, smartphone enabled operating. I don't know, God knows what it is, right? But this is a commissioned piece called The Vessel, and I put it in there because it's quite funny because there's now this whole thing where there's either people who love it, so it's either the stairway that goes to nowhere because they're essentially stairs that go up and down over and over again, or as what Eater in New York said, it looks like a big shawarma. So you have to really figure out, how as an arts sector are we going to signal the right things to the world, right? Whatever it is that we're building, how can we build something so it's not just some kind of like big shawarma, but something that actually has something of import to say to the world. Understand what it means to be diverse and integrated. I think part of what it actually means in terms of all of this digital transformation stuff is ensuring that we understand how the tools that we're developing are also also, whoever creates the tools that we're developing need to be as diverse and integrated as those clients that we purport to serve. We have to be network aware. I mean, that's the one thing too that I think we weren't very good at as artists in the early web, is, although this is an example of a set of artists who were aware of network effects, we need to understand that what we're dealing with is a networked digital medium, and so we need to figure out how do we build the infrastructure to help us to transform the digital using the inherent networked capability of the medium itself, right? So that's part of what we need to think about, is as we build our tools and as we build our systems, how do we ensure that we are using that networked capability in the best way that we can, so that it's not just about a one-to-one system that we're building. It's a different kind of, it's not a broadcast model, as all of you know, and so we need to kind of really understand that differently. But we also have to be aware of network effects, right? So Facebook obviously is an interesting example of how having the networked effect of the propagation of fake news is something that we all know about. So we have to be sensitive to these network effects. We need to restore the public commons. So this is really critical. Again, $20 billion for a piece of public art that could have been used for all sorts of other things. But more importantly, I think one of the things that we need to understand is that the public commons is no longer just, what's happening actually is that the public commons is evolving, because the public commons is now both virtual and real at the same time, okay? So we have public commons that are just in real life, so like a park, okay? We have public commons that are on the web, and there aren't really very many. Wikipedia could be an example of that, okay? But now we have public commons that are in real life and cyber life, okay? So a good example of this is the big project that is coming into the Quayside in Toronto, which is Sidewalk Labs taking over Quayside and potentially taking over the entire eastern waterfront, okay? That space belongs to us. All that land belonged to us. All that base belonged to us. And yet, we are allowing a corporation to take over those public lands and actually not just develop it as real estate, but make money out of that, but also embed all sorts of technologies into that space that they can then resell, whose data may indeed be part of a civic public trust, but then they build all sorts of applications that make use of that data that they can then resell back to us, right? So this is the start of how these kinds of environments are being created, okay? With or without the art sector's acknowledgement, relationship or engagement, etc. And in fact, what tends to happen is Sidewalk Labs developed the 307 building. They've reached out to a bunch of artists and started asking them to work with them, to showcase their work, etc., which is all goodness. I'm not suggesting that that's bad, and I'm not suggesting that artists shouldn't try to get paid for showcasing the work that they're doing, but we also need to have a bit of a balance on understanding that we can actually have a role to say no, to say that yes, we'd be happy to do that, but we'd really like to know exactly how you're using our work, or how you're attending to notions of data, or how you're attending to notions of data justice, etc., right? So it's really interesting how a lot of these technology companies require the participation of the arts sector to sell their ideas and ideologies to a public in a more palatable way. But the arts sector needs to understand how they actually have power in such a relationship. And so if we can figure out a way to work with technology companies and push them towards transforming themselves. You can ask me later whether I think that's possible. I think that would be a really good start. And then last but not least, it's really up to all of us to commit to upholding our digital human rights, because that's what's being built as we speak.